two triangles are congruent if and only if there is correspondence between the vertices of the triangles such that the corresponding angles are congruent and the corresponding sides are congruent. As you can see on the given statement, it uses if and only if. It is said to be a biconditional statement. So we can prove that the two triangles are congruent if the corresponding angles are congruent and the corresponding sides are congruent. And also, if the corresponding angles are congruent of the two triangles and the corresponding sides are congruent, therefore, the two triangles are congruent. So that will be a biconditional statement. So are triangle CTA and triangle SPU congruent? So we can determine that if the corresponding parts of the given triangles are congruent. So let's have triangle CTA and triangle SPU. For the triangle CTA, the measure of angle C is 95 degrees and the measure of angle S is 95 degrees. Therefore, measure of angle C is equal to the measure of angle S. Why? Because they are both equal to 95. So that will be a transitive property. And we can say that angle C is congruent to angle S by the definition of congruent angles. So definition of congruent angles states that if the two angles are equal, therefore they are congruent. Another, the measure of angle T is 45 degrees and the measure of angle P is also 45 degrees. So we can say that the measure of angle T is equal to the measure of angle P by the transitive property because they are both equal to 45. And since they are equal, we can say that angle T is congruent to angle P. Next, angle A is equal to 40 and angle U is equal to 40. So we can say that measure of angle A is equal to the measure of angle U because they are equal to 40. Therefore, the two angles are congruent. Next, for the side, we have segment CT is equal to 6 and segment SP is equal to 6. Therefore, segment CT is equal to segment SP by the transitive property because they are both equal to 6. Since the two segments are equal, we can say that the two segments are also congruent by the definition of congruent segment. Segment CA, that is equal to 10, and segment SU is equal to 10. Therefore, segment CA is equal to segment SU by the transitive property of equality because they are both equal to 10. Since they are equal, we can say that triangle CA is congruent to triangle SU. For triangle CTA, the measure of segment AT is equal to 12 and the measure of segment UP is equal to 12. So, since they are both equal to 12, we can say that segment AT is equal to segment UP. And since they are both equal, we can say that segment AT is congruent to segment UP by the definition of congruent segment. So definition of congruent segment states that if two segments are equal, therefore they are congruent. Now, are triangle CTA and triangle SPU congruent? Yes. Why? Because the corresponding three angles are congruent and the corresponding three sides are congruent. So again, C corresponds to S, T corresponds to P, and A corresponds to U. Another way to determine that two triangles are congruent using the markings and the arcs. So meaning if they have the same arc, therefore they are congruent. If they have the same amount of tick marking, therefore they are congruent. So let's check first if the two triangles are congruent. Angle A with one mark corresponds to angle U with one mark, and they are congruent because they have the same one arc. Another, angle T with two marks or two arcs is congruent to angle P because angle P also has two arcs. Angle C with three arcs is congruent to angle S because they are the same markings. Next, segment AT with this one, AT with two markings, tick markings, is congruent to segment UP. Why UP, not PU or segment PU? Because A corresponds to U and T corresponds to P. Therefore, if we start from A, therefore we should start U for the segment UP. Next one, segment AC, this one, segment AC with one tick marking should be congruent to segment US because they have the same one tick marking. Last one, we have segment CT with three markings is congruent to segment SP. Since the three corresponding angles are congruent to the and the three corresponding sides are congruent for the both triangles, therefore they are congruent. So we have three ways to determine the congruence of the triangle. First, using by overlapping, if they are perfectly fit, therefore they are congruent. Using the measurements, if they have equal measures for both sides and angles, therefore they are congruent. Now, and the third one is if they have the same markings and arcs or the amount of markings and arcs, they are congruent. Therefore, the triangles are congruent. Let's use the markings to determine the corresponding parts. So we have triangle ABC and triangle DRS. So segment AB corresponds to, let's check the markings. So A with one arc and B with two arcs. Then the marking for the segment is 1. So we look for with one tick marking and we start from D to R. So therefore, segment AB corresponds to segment DR. Again, it will not correspond to RD because they have not the same or different markings for the arcs. Another, angle C corresponds to, so let's check for the triangle ABC. angle C with 3 arcs. So we look for the 3 arcs for triangle DRS, and that will be angle S. Therefore, angle C corresponds to angle S. Next, angle BAC. We have angle BAC corresponds to, so let's check. So B corresponds to what? A corresponds to what? And C corresponds to what? So since this is angle, it corresponds to an angle of the other triangle. So B has 2 markings. There, so with R. So we start from R. Next, A with 1 marking. So with D. And C with 3 markings. So with S. Therefore, angle BAC corresponds to angle RTS. So again, look for the markings in order for you to have the proper corresponding parts of the triangle. Given, triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DRS. So true or false? Does triangle BCA is congruent to triangle RDS? So let's use the given. Triangle A corresponds to D, B corresponds to R, and C corresponds to S. Now let's check triangle BCA. B should correspond to R. That's correct. C correspond to S, but here it corresponds to D. Therefore, it is false. Complete the statement. If triangle CAT is congruent to triangle DOG, then segment TA is congruent to what? So we have C corresponds to D, A corresponds to O, and T corresponds to G. So then segment TA is congruent to segment what corresponds to T, that is G, and what corresponds to A, that is O. So therefore, segment TA is congruent to segment GO. Another, if triangle CAT is congruent to triangle DOG, then angle TCA is congruent to, so since this is angle, it should be also an angle. So T corresponds to G, so G. C corresponds to D, and A corresponds to O. Even though we do not have the given figure, we can use the given as a true statement in order for us to get the conclusion or the then statement. So